Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dr. Rahael Gupta, who I've known for an incredibly long time and have tremendous respect for. So let me tell you why. Dr. Rahael Gupta earned her BA in Human Biology from Stanford University and her MS in Narrative Medicine from Columbia University. She went on to earn her MD from the University of Michigan Medical School in Ann Arbor, where she was awarded the Raymond W. Wagner Award for Distinguished Performance in Psychiatry. During medical school, she wrote about her experience of struggling with depression as a physician trainee, publishing her essay, I Solemnly Share, in JAMA's A Piece of My Mind, and producing a short film aimed at inspiring empathy and awareness about depression among physician trainees. Dr. Gupta completed her adult psychiatry residency training here at UCLA, during which time she served as an APA Leadership Fellow and Quality Improvement Chief Resident. She fast-tracked and we recruited her into the Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship, where she gave birth to Benny, her now 16-month-old son, during her first year. She is now a second-year Child Fellow, serving as the CAP Program Co-Chief Fellow and pursuing the Parent-Infant Mental Health Area of Distinction. She's also a newly certified facilitator of the Circle of Security International Early Intervention Program for Parents and Children and has begun leading Circle of Security groups at UCLA's Perinatal Intensive Outpatient Program. Exciting, hot off the press news. After graduation, Dr. Gupta will be joining a group private practice, Adelpha Psychiatric Group, where she will work with both children and adults with a broad array of psychiatric conditions. She has a heart of gold, and I'm just going to top this off with a very important distinguished award that she just won, which is the Greenblatt Award, one of our premier awards in child psychiatry here at UCLA that is given to a fellow for leadership, camaraderie, teamwork, and having an intense and incredible amount of empathy for patients and co-fellows. So thank you so much. Good luck. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and for that really kind introduction, Dr. Richards. As Dr. Richards said, my talk focuses on the Circle of Security, an attachment-based reflective parenting intervention and its particular value for caregivers affected by trauma. I have no disclosures to report, financial or otherwise. Before beginning, I'd like to express immense gratitude for a number of people. Dr. Misty Richards, my incredible mentor, UCLA's Director of Perinatal Psychiatry and of Infant Mental Health, CAP Program Director, and fearless leader of our newly minted Parent-Infant Mental Health Area of Concentration. Deborah Harris, the leader of my Circle of Security Parenting Facilitator Training. The leadership and valuable instruction I received from many as part of the National Consortium for Reproductive Psychiatry, or NCRP, training program. And finally, the patients of UCLA's perinatal IOP, who have allowed me to be with them and to listen to their reflections. There are 4 primary objectives for listeners of this talk. Number 1, to understand the clinical relevance of reflective parenting, particularly during the first 5 years of a child's life. Number 2, to understand early matrescence as a vulnerable developmental period in a caregiver's life, during which reflective parenting interventions can have a profound impact on child mental health. Number 3, to understand the main features of Circle of Security Parenting, or COSP, and how it supports the development of secure attachment and builds caregiver capacity to reflect and mentalize. The 4th and most important objective for my purposes today, building on the knowledge imparted by other trainees who have presented in this area, is to understand the value of COSP for caregivers affected by trauma and special considerations that may arise when working with this population. So let's get to addressing the first objective. The ability to reflect and mentalize are different. While reflection involves looking back on past experiences and considering thoughts and feelings involved, mentalization refers to the ability to understand one's own and others' mental states, thereby comprehending one's own and others' intentions and affects. It has been theorized that the ability to mentalize is a component of healthy personality development and is achieved through a child's secure attachment to the parent. Reflective parenting is a theory of parenting developed by psychoanalyst Peter Fonagy and colleagues. Reflective functioning and mentalization are generally understood to refer to the capacity to think about oneself and one's child as psychological beings with minds of their own, and to consider underlying mental states and motivations when interpreting behaviors. The theory of reflective parenting posits that through developing our capacity for reflection, we develop the ability to understand our own behavioral responses and the responses of others as a meaningful attempt to communicate inner mental states. Fonagy describes reflective function as the, quote, uniquely human capacity to make sense of each other. Research supports the idea that a caregiver with high reflective functioning has the ability to see their child as a separate, autonomous individual with a mind of his own. As a result, they attribute thoughts, feelings, intentionality, and desires to their child and can recognize their own thoughts, feelings, intentions, and desires. When a parent has a well-developed reflective functioning capacity, it strengthens the parent-child relationship, teaches the child how to understand and regulate his behavior, and so supports cognitive development. So let's take a look at why, Let's take a look at why this is so important during the first 5 years of a child's life by watching one of my favorite short videos.
What if I was to tell you that a game of peekaboo could change the world? Sounds impossible, right? Well, I'm here today to prove it's not. Hi, I'm Molly, and I'm 7, and this is my little friend Ari. Say hi, Ari. Hi. Oh, and this is my neighbor, Amajot. He has to take Ari away now to get ready for our experiment. But don't worry, they'll be back. My talk today is about some powerful things you grown-ups can do that shape us as children and the adults we become. How do I know? Because my parents and people around me did them, early and often. I know not all kids are as lucky. Some of my friends, some kids at my school, and many around the world. And I would really like to help change that. Thanks to scientists, we now know just how important the first 5 years are for our health and development, especially our brains. Ari started learning long before he was even born, from inside his mummy's tummy. When Ari was born, he was tiny, and he cried all the time. He was always hungry, and he pooped a lot. Now, he laughs and giggles and makes funny noises. But those are just the changes we hear and see. There's way more going on inside. So, let's talk more about our brains. The blue bag is the rough size and weight of a healthy baby's brain at birth. The red one is a baby's brain after the first year. It almost doubles in volume. And by my age, it's almost 90% the volume of an adult brain. Our brains develop faster in our early years than at any other time in our lives. It can create up to 1 million neural connections every second. But we need your help. Our healthy development depends on these top 5 things. 1, connecting. 2, talking. 3, playing. 4, a healthy home. 5, community. All of this helps our brains and us reach our full potential. So what's something you can do that can really make a difference? Scientists call it serve and return. That's just a grown-up way of saying connect, talk, and play with us. And here's the really big news. Amajot, Ari, you ready?
Ready?
Copycat games build imagination and empathy.
And
Naming games build vocabulary and attention.
is it Daddy? Ari, Daddy, Ari.
And games like Peekaboo, yep, Peekaboo, actually build memory and trust. Each time you talk to us, play with us, make us laugh, it not only builds and strengthens our relationships and mental health, it actually teaches us some of the most important life skills. From making friends, to taking a test, to getting a job, to one day maybe even starting a family of our own. Interactions early and often matter. Take it from me, the 7-year-old up here, talking about brain science. Okay, now, let's see what happens when the connection is taken away. So now he's trying to get his dad's attention again. He's reaching out like, that was fun, why have you stopped? I know it's important for adults to use their devices sometimes, but kids are hardwired to seek out meaningful connections. Not receiving them causes confusion and stress. Okay, Amajot, please re-engage.
Ari. Okay.
Now, what if our whole childhood was like that last 30 seconds? How hard it would be for a child to feel calm, to feel safe, to learn to trust anyone, and the lifelong impact that would have. That makes me feel sad. Ari only reacted the way he did and recovered so quickly because the connection between him and his dad is usually so strong. The positive relationships with the grown-ups in our lives gives kids the confidence we need to try new things, to explore, and be a kid. So please try and remember, the most special period for our development is the first 5 years, starting from inside Mummy's tummy. What's something really impactful you can do? Serve and return. And when? Early and often. Please give it up for Amajot and Ari.
So what this bright, incredible 7-year-old person shares builds upon a wealth of research described in detail in prior Grand Rounds presentations. Implicit in her explanation are Mary Ainsworth's pioneering work on the importance of sensitive parenting, Beatrice Beebe's work on face-to-face communication, Bob MD's work on joint attention and social referencing, and more. The most important point to take away here is that this process of serve and return, which hinges on a caregiver's ability to see an infant as an autonomous psychological being and respond to the infant's needs, has enormous consequences for the child's cognitive and emotional development. So what's going on with mothers during this critical period in child development? This takes us to our second objective, understanding early matrescence as a vulnerable developmental period in a caregiver's life, during which reflective parenting interventions can have a profound impact on child mental health. Matrescence is a term coined by anthropologists and well described by psychiatrist and author Dr. Alexandra Sachs in her 2017 article, The Birth of a Mother. Most of the time, motherhood involves experiences of joy, but also of worry, disappointment, guilt, competition, frustration, anger, and fear. This is an emotionally complex period analogous to adolescence. As described by psychiatrist Daniel Stern in the 1990s in his books, The Motherhood Constellation and The Birth of a Mother, giving birth to a new identity can be as demanding as giving birth to a baby. Becoming a mother is a hugely significant physical and psychological change, one of the biggest changes that a woman goes through. Sachs points out that the focus of the medical community is usually on neonatal outcomes rather than on a woman's identity transition. But this is a shortcoming of the medical community in general, but also of psychiatry and child psychiatry, because a woman's story and how her psychology impacts her parenting is worthy of examination and can have extremely important and far-reaching implications, both for the mother's mental health and for the child's emotional and cognitive development. The theory of reflective parenting teaches us that when a caregiver has more insight into their emotions, they are more in control of their behaviors. And a caregiver who has a greater awareness of their own psychology may be more empathetic to their child's emotions, which in turn has implications for the child. Interventions which encourage reflective parenting and mentalization during early matrescence are investments in child mental health with the potential to be profoundly impactful. There's a popular misconception that a mother either struggles with peripartum mental health issues or breezes through early motherhood, and this is simply not the case. There are normal challenges that most mothers experience. For example, changing family dynamics. The baby is a catalyst that can open up new possibilities for more intimate connections, as well as stresses in a woman's closest relationships with her partner, siblings, friends, and parents. And whether a woman parents her child as her mother raised her or adopts a different style, becoming a mother provides an opportunity for a do-over. In a way, a woman gets to re-experience her own childhood in the act of parenting, repeating what was good and trying to improve what was not. And if a woman had a difficult relationship with her mother, she may try to be the mother that she wishes she'd had. Ambivalence. This term refers to the pull and push of wanting a child close and also of craving space, physically and emotionally, as a normal wave of motherhood. Ambivalence is a feeling that comes up in the roles in relationships, in all of the roles in relationships a person is most invested in, because they're always a juggling act between giving and taking. And it's uncomfortable to feel two things at once. Most of the time, the experience of motherhood is not good or bad, it's both good and bad. Other challenges include the idea of fantasy versus reality. By the time a baby arrives, a mother has already developed feelings about her fantasy baby. And as a pregnancy progresses, a woman creates a story about her make-believe child and becomes emotionally invested in that story. A woman's fantasies of pregnancy and motherhood may be informed by observations of the experiences of her mother and other female relatives, and they may be powerful enough that reality disappoints if it doesn't align with her vision. Then there's the issue of guilt, shame, and the, quote, good enough mother. There's also the ideal mother in a woman's mind. She's always cheerful and happy and always puts her child's needs first. She has few needs of her own. She doesn't make any decisions she regrets. And many women compare themselves to that mother. But of course, they never measure up because she's a fantasy. She's a fiction. Some women think that the, quote, good enough mother, a phrase coined by the pediatrician and psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, is not acceptable because it sounds like settling. But striving for perfection sets women up to feel shame and guilt. Mothers will feel guilty because they're always making challenging and sometimes impossible choices. And at times, they're required to put their own needs over those of their child. Most women don't talk about feeling ashamed because it's usually about something that they don't want anyone else to know. Shame is the feeling that there's something wrong with me. This is often the result of comparing yourself to an unrealistic, unattainable standard. Early matrescence is the difficult and disorienting period during which circle of security sessions are often held. So what is the circle of security? At its core, this is a visual map of attachment. At COSP, the focus is on training providers with many different backgrounds and from many different disciplines to help caregivers connect with the children in their lives through an 8-week course. All interventions are focused on helping caregivers to reflect on children's attachment needs in order to promote secure attachment with a child. Founding principles underlying the COSP models of intervention include that attachment problems in infancy and early childhood increase the probability of psychopathology later on in life, that secure attachment relationships with caregivers are protective for infants and preschoolers, setting the foundation for social competence and promoting effective functioning of the emotion regulation and stress response systems, that the quality of the attachment relationship is amenable to change, so early and often matters, that learning, including therapeutic change, occurs from within a secure base relationship, that lasting change in the attachment relationship comes from caregivers developing specific relationship capacities rather than learning techniques to manage behavior. And finally, that all caregivers in their hearts want what is best for their children. This short video offers a brief introduction to the COSP program.
Parents, we all wonder if we're getting it right. We want to know we're meeting our children's needs, helping them grow, and giving them all that we can. We try to combine our own experience of being parented with the advice of others and our own instincts and beliefs about what is best. And still, we so often worry that we're not succeeding. In a world that is always offering the next best parenting solution, the circle of security is based on decades of attachment research. Unlike many behavioral perspectives, it offers relationship tools to provide a new way of understanding your children's needs, creating lasting security for them and more satisfaction for you. The circle graphic has been created to help you know what to look for so you can read your children's behavior to guide you in meeting their needs. It's really not complicated. People of all ages have attachment needs. These needs can be divided in 3 ways. Let's look at this child. First, he needs to know the freedom and confidence to go out and explore his world. Second, he needs to feel assured that whenever he's ready, he can come back for comfort and protection. Third, he needs his caregiver to be in charge in a kind way. 3 basic needs that can be thought of as going out on the circle, coming in on the circle, and hands on the circle. Let's have a look in more detail. Feeling safe and supported, our children want to discover their world. When going out, they need to know that their exploration is encouraged, that we're right there watching over them, delighting in them, offering help when needed, and ready to enjoy their new adventures with them. And when they're coming in, they need us to refill their emotional cup. This means organizing their emotions and letting them know we are delighted to welcome them back, protect, comfort, and understand them. The key for us as parents is to remain strong and kind while knowing when to encourage their going out into the world and how to be available to welcome them back to us. It's crucial that we learn to identify our children's needs like this, because misreading them, or worse, missing them altogether, can cause pain and frustration. We all know how uncomfortable it can be to be held too close when we want to be out exploring, or kept at a distance when we need emotional support, or simply to be without someone who is bigger, stronger, wiser and kind, who we can trust to understand what we need when we're feeling lost, confused, or out of control. When a child misbehaves, the cause is often rooted in how safe and secure they're feeling. So it's not surprising that they behave well when a parent learns to tune into their child's needs on the circle in this way. And because our needs on the circle never disappear, Learning to read cues can help you better understand and meet the needs of people of all ages, including your own. So that's all there is to it. Just know that at any given moment, your child is somewhere on the circle asking you to meet a need. Support my going out. Welcome my coming in. Be the hands that keep me safe by staying in charge and committed to helping me feel connected. And please remember this, there's no such thing as perfect parenting. At Circle of Security, we've come to realize that good enough is, well, good enough. All of us are going to miss needs on the circle time and again. Welcome to the club. But if we meet our children's needs enough of the time, the results will be happier, healthier, more secure children, and parents too.
So let's take a closer look at the circle and the two hands. The hand on the top, secure base, allows for a launching pad to support the child's exploration. The hand on the bottom, safe haven, allows for a place for the child to come back. The caregiver welcomes the child back in, engaging with the child's needs for protection, comfort, and organizing or reflecting back, making sense of feelings. An aware and present caregiver means that hands are on the circle. The program uses videos of real caregiver-child dyads interacting and encourages caregivers to reflect on questions like, where is the child on the circle now? What need is the child trying to show or express? And how is the caregiver responding or not responding to the child's need? This is the circle of limited security, essentially a visual representation of neglect. As you can see, hands are off the circle, so the child is scared and without anyone to turn to. There is a lot of material contained within COSP, and I want to highlight just a couple of key concepts. One is called being with. This refers to staying present with and supporting organization of a child's emotions. Caregivers are encouraged to reflect on their experience as a child and how much their own parents were able to, quote, be with and help organize feelings like curiosity, sadness, fear, anger, shame, and joy. Emotions that one's parents was able to be with go inside the circle, whereas those that were not accepted or engaged with go outside. Caregivers are also encouraged to reflect on feelings they have more difficulty being with in their own children. Sometimes there's a relationship here. Caregivers are also encouraged to ask, why do I tend to struggle with some of my child's needs on the circle and not others? The answer has to do with how certain needs that a child has on the circle trigger uncomfortable feelings in caregivers. It is explained that this likely has to do with how those same needs triggered uncomfortable feelings in a caregiver's own parents. Imagine two different clips showing a serene beach. One clip is accompanied by gentle, safe music, while the other clip is accompanied by an odious tune, what might be referred to as shark music. Shark music tells us to be afraid of a feeling or need that is actually safe. Caregivers are encouraged to identify when they are hearing shark music. The idea that the more specific a caregiver can be about which needs on the circle trigger their shark music, and the more aware of these specific triggers they become, the better off their children will be. This is, at its core, an exercise in mentalization. So how do we understand the value of COSP for caregivers affected by trauma? I'm not going to speak at length about the neurobiology of childhood trauma, about which many of you are familiar and some of you experts. However, I will make a few key points. The first is that when severe and chronic trauma occurs, it constitutes a theft of capacities. A child's brain is different depending on whether they're exposed to trauma or not. Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain offers a simple way to understand the basic functions of the brain and how they're impacted by trauma. The brainstem, represented here by my wrist and bottom part of my hand, controls breathing, balance, temperature, digestion. It helps address the question, am I safe? The limbic system, represented here by my thumb, deals with key functions of emotions and memory. It gets your body ready for action, for a fight, flight, or freeze response when danger is perceived. It helps address the question, am I loved? The prefrontal cortex, represented here by the dorsal aspect of my fingers, regulates our executive functions like judgment, decision-making, impulse control, comprehension, and information processing, and many other functions that involve rational thinking. It helps address the question, what am I learning from this? The limbic system and brainstem can override the prefrontal cortex or thinking part of the brain and remain on high alert or, quote, flip our lid. This is good when we are actually in the presence of danger, but we don't want to always operate on high alert. Individuals who have been affected by severe chronic trauma can get stuck with their lid flipped. In other words, if one is constantly having to ask, am I safe and am I loved? It can be difficult to engage with functions that involve rational thinking and consider, what am I learning from this? The abilities to reflect and mentalize are in jeopardy. In an adaptive response to trauma, the amygdala releases chemicals that allow the body to respond to a potential threat, to engage in a fight or flight. The hippocampus creates potent memories of the traumatic event. However, if the threat continues or is repeated, as in the case of severe and chronic trauma, the system stays on and can get stuck in a situation where hormones keep flowing and the individual can't think or plan efficiently because they're experiencing indiscriminate fear and have impaired use of their prefrontal cortex. One is stuck in the brainstem, cerebellum, limbic system, trying to survive. Consider the baseline challenges of matrescence and the inherent re-experiencing of childhood, combined with the new daunting obligation of serving as a secure base and safe haven for a tiny human. And consider how much more challenging this might be for the brain impacted by trauma. Whether or not someone has experienced trauma is, of course, on its own, not predictive of the development of PTSD or of the influence of trauma on caregiver responsiveness and capacity to reflect and mentalize. As Freiberg, Adelson, and Shapiro write in their seminal 1975 piece, Ghosts in the Nursery, quote, history is not destiny then, and whether parenthood becomes flooded with griefs and injuries, or whether parenthood becomes a time of renewal, cannot be predicted from the narrative of the parental past. However, in certain families, the baby is burdened by the oppressive past of his parents from the moment he enters the world, haunted by ghosts, representing the repetition of the past in the present. In these families, there is a risk of a mother's story of abandonment and neglect, for example, being reenacted with her own baby. Freiberg et al. Used case studies to illustrate how these caregivers are often able to remember and provide detailed factual accounts of being abused and neglected, but unable to remember the associated affective experiences, the terror, the helplessness, the sadness. The authors hypothesize that, quote, access to childhood pain becomes a powerful deterrent against repetition in parenting, while repression and isolation of painful affect provide the psychological requirements for identification with the betrayers and the aggressors. In other words, when a caregiver is able to recall and engage with the pain of childhood in a safe and therapeutic environment, the ghosts depart and the afflicted parents become the protectors of their children against the repetition of their own conflicted past. Whereas for Freiberg et al., the ghosts are seen as the presence of something left by trauma, Finagi's 1993 reflective parenting conceptualization, they are seen as more as the absence of mentalization. Good mentalization capacities are theorized to be at the core of resilience processes following abuse and neglect. And recent research has shown that deficits in mentalizing trauma specifically plays an important role in the transition to parenthood in expectant mothers with childhood histories of abuse and neglect. Reflective functioning concerning trauma is shown to be uniquely associated with levels of investment in pregnancy, positive feelings towards pregnancy, engagement in maternity, and the quality of the relationship with one's partner. Research shows that in the absence of any parenting interventions, a mother's degree of prenatal reflective functioning is actually predictive of the infant's attachment classification at 1 year of age. And more recent work shows that it is parental mentalization that is the mediating factor, determining whether an attachment style is transmitted between generations. Many mothers with childhood histories of abuse and neglect struggle to respond adequately to their infant's attachment needs and foster the development of secure and organized attachments. In their 2015 paper published in the Infant Mental Health Journal, Berthelot et al. Shows that there is a high concordance of 70% between infant attachment disorganization and unresolved loss or trauma in mothers with histories of abuse and neglect. Inadequate mentalization regarding trauma is thought to make these mothers vulnerable to momentary displays of inadequately modulated aggression or displaying affectively inappropriate and mismatched reactions to infant distress. Conversely, equipped with an awareness of the emotional impact of abusive experiences, a mother can take into account their own reactivity to their infant's displays of distress that trigger memories and feelings related to their own traumatic past. And they can keep the infant in mind so that they can respond appropriately to the infant's cries and soothe them. This is a quote from Alice Miller's wise and ever relevant The Drama of the Gifted Child, which speaks to the concepts I've just mentioned. Quote, "Only the never-ending work of mourning can help us from lapsing into the illusion that we have found the parent we once urgently needed. Empathetic and open, understanding and understandable, honest and available, helpful and loving, feeling, transparent, clear, without unintelligible contradictions. Such a parent was never ours, for a mother can react empathetically only to the extent that she has become free of her own childhood. When she denies the vicissitudes of her early life, she wears invisible chains." Miller also famously wrote that the more we idealize the past and refuse to acknowledge our childhood sufferings, the more we pass them on unconsciously to the next generation. With eyes wide open to how one's past has affected and informed one's ability to be with certain emotions, to keep one's hands on the circle, to perceive certain stimuli as shark music, one can change one's behavior and responsiveness to a child. I've been working with Dr. Misty Richards in UCLA's perinatal IOP and have started to facilitate Circle of Security parenting groups with mothers there, many of whom have been deeply affected by trauma. And I'd like to highlight one specific patient who graciously agreed to speak with me at length about her experience and provided consent for me to share her reflections on the Circle of Security with you all today. SD is a 36-year-old female with a psychiatric history of depression, PTSD, panic disorder, and OCD, without prior suicide attempts, presenting for treatment in the perinatal IOP at 15 weeks pregnant. Per the HPI at intake in the IOP, she reported a history of depression and anxiety since early childhood. She described abuse throughout childhood, including physical abuse by her older brother. Her mother would protect her by locking her in the bathroom while her brother tried to attack her. At age 11, the mother had another child. The father did not want that child, and the parents made an agreement that the father would not participate in raising the child. So SD was forced to parent her younger brother. She described significant anxiety during her mother's pregnancy, as well as significant anxiety about her younger brother's safety. She's no longer in touch with her younger brother. She severed contact with her mother and her older brother. She is still in touch with her father. She reports significant anxiety around pregnancy and becoming a mother. She expresses worry that she'll repeat the same adverse circumstances that she herself experienced, and that she will not be able to parent her child adequately. She was feeling very fatigued and described her mood as pessimistic. She said she had close friends, but didn't want to, quote, trauma dump on them. S shared with me that she worried about breaking the cycle of how she was parented, and this fear was the source of tons of panic and anxiety within her. She shared a firm belief that, quote, "I truly believe that my parents did the best that they could, and it was also not good enough. That's been a difficult place for me to exist." In addition to the history outlined in the HPI, S described a history of emotional neglect by her parents throughout her life. Her parents never spent any meaningful time with her. They never watched a movie or read a book with her and declined any invitations to do so. They did not take any interest in anything she was interested in. S comes from a family of baseball players, some of whom play professionally, and S played baseball too at the urging of her family. She did not and never liked it. Her father spent time and money on baseball practice, but S says, it wasn't what I wanted. When S called home from college, where she was a college athlete, her mother was always very clearly distracted on the phone, never listening to what S was saying. When S called attention to this, her mother became angry and labeled her as abusive. In other contexts, if S ever explained that her feelings had been hurt, her mother would turn this around on S, blaming her for any discord. S describes being immediately taken with the circle because it provided practical parenting guidance, rather than being what she expected, a support group. She recalls hearing Dr. Richards remark that she herself thinks about the circle of security at least 3 times per day, feeling intrigued and thinking to herself, well, this must be critical. Her experience was heavy and painful, but it was insightful. Learning about the basic construction of the circle with secure base, safe haven, and present hands made her realize that it was normal to want parents that delighted in her, to have their help organizing her feelings. This helped her to find self-compassion and to dispel a deeply internalized notion that she was somehow bad for wanting more. It was particularly painful to see where she did not have comfort, where she did not have support. These revelations made her feel sad for a young version of herself. Freiberg et al. Might call this the access to childhood pain that is critical to mentalizing trauma. S describes parts of the COSP programming that she found particularly impactful. The Being With activity illustrated for her what she had always known, that, quote, sadness wasn't allowed within our house. S found it difficult to function because she needed to engage with her sadness, and she reflects that avoidance of sadness is what led her to struggle with depression and anxiety from an early age. The section on rupture and repair, not discussed, made her realize that her father's conflict resolution style had been to have a big blowout, followed by an hour alone to cool off, and then to pretend that nothing had happened. She reflects, there will be moments for all parents where there's a breakdown, where you fall off the circle. I saw how critically important it was for the parent to come back. She says, what I want so much for my son is that I enjoy him for who he is, not for who I want him to be, and that he knows I'm always coming back. I'm going to apologize to him. That helps organize feelings too. Discussions about shark music led her to recognize that it will be hard for her to serve as a secure base and allow her child to freely explore because she perceives the world as broadly dangerous. She reflects, if I can recognize situations that will stress me out, I will be better equipped to deal with them in the moment. When asked what else she wants to do differently than her parents, S says she wants to validate the feelings of her baby, talk to her baby, and help with organizing feelings. She says that it's very important for her that her partner does the same. She remarks, I remember being a child. It's important to me to be able to help with organizing my child's feelings. It's so important for your parent to be there with you in that safe haven way. It's about listening to your child, and you are there for them, not the other way around. S describes feeling very capable and very confident that I can do this as she moves towards delivery. She says, without question, this program will make me a better parent. That is absolutely true of the circle. It's fact. I'm so lucky that I learned this in such a safe environment. The gratitude I feel that I was taught this is something that I don't have the words to express. It feels like there would be a lot less trauma in the world if people could parent this way. In closing, consider that at baseline matrescence, the process of becoming a mother is an earth-shattering experience, which at the outset involves a painful physical recovery and far more frequently than discussed, a debilitating emotional one as well. This is a process which transforms your understanding of the experience of all childbearing people, which charges your anger when bodily autonomy is under attack and sharpens your visceral sorrow when children are hurt, which necessitates a renegotiation of identity as you simultaneously claim the precious newness before you and engage nostalgia for past versions of yourself, which engenders distance and closeness in different relationships in unexpected ways, which brings you back into contact with the sweetness and difficulty of childhood, motivating scrutiny of your own family system and complicating your understanding of your personal narrative. Becoming a mother is hard, and it is harder still for those who have been unfairly burdened by trauma and neglect, robbed of their capacities for emotional regulation on a neurobiological level, saddled with insecure attachment constructions and memories that feel too painful to touch. And yet, so much is at stake during this vulnerable period. So much hinges on the mother's ability to recognize and respond to the infant's needs, to serve as both a secure base and a safe haven. The infant's cognitive and emotional development, their self-esteem, their ability to form healthy attachments with others are just a few critical items of consideration. Research and clinical experience show us that investment during this period, supporting caregivers' capacity to reflect and mentalize, is quite literally life-changing. It is an investment in child mental health with global developmental consequences. I invite you to dream of a world in which this kind of support for caregivers is broadly and readily accessible, perhaps even a standard part of reproductive care, perhaps integrated into parenting prep courses, along with other key topics like diapering and feeding. In this imagined future, I see more parents like S, confidently moving toward delivery, equipped with a framework for understanding interaction with her child, less encumbered by the ghosts in the nursery. I see less emotional avoidance, depression, anxiety, child abuse, neglect. I see more childhoods furnished with love, curiosity, comfort, presence, and delight. What could be more worthy of our collective attention? Thank you so much for listening.
Oh, that was so powerful. Just want to thank you for that, Dr. Gupta. That was truly, wow, you need to write that down, write a book. I kid you not, that was just beautiful. It was almost like a meditation at the end. Thank you for sharing. For those of us for those who are with us right now, please submit any questions you have in the Q&A, and we will go ahead and read them out, and Dr. Gupta will share. But of course, I have many questions for you, but we'll start with one, which is more of something that you said that was so powerful that I haven't heard before. So it was about motherhood. It says, you said, it's not good or bad, it's both good and bad.
Yeah.
And I love that so much, because in what we do as child psychiatrists and some of us reproductive psychiatrists and working with families is creating the stage or disarming so that a family can really share the dynamic that's going on at home. And so that segues into my question for you as child psychiatrists and thinking about engaging with families, especially engaging with families with little ones that don't have the tools yet to maybe communicate effectively their needs, maybe don't have the words, maybe have externalizing symptoms. What's your advice for if you're doing an intake in H&P? What are some questions that can encourage reflection, maybe a little bit of mentalization in parents when you're asking them about the symptoms their child's exhibiting?
Yeah, I think I love that question. And I think that a couple of things I would say. One is that I think it's important to pay attention to where the parent is at. Understanding more about the kind of the emotional position that they're in that moment, because that so much of their ability to see their child's needs hinges on their capacity to be able to recognize their own emotions, and then to recognize their child as this autonomous individual with their own emotions. And so it's important to have an understanding of where the parent, or kind of the primary tool for data collection about the child's behavior, where they're at. And I think that I often return to this idea that behavior is communication, right? So I think there can be a tendency, especially if in the throes of frustration, stress, to see a difficult behavior, but behind every behavior, there's a need, right? And so challenging a caregiver to try to think about, what does that behavior communicate about the internal mental state of the child? What does that behavior communicate about what the child is looking for? Maybe they're running to you and crying and flailing their arms, but what they're looking for is for you to comfort them, for you to organize their feelings. Yeah, that's what I would say.
That's such an important point that is introduced in the circle security that you are just explicitly stating here, which is bids for attention, and how the patient that you discussed would bid her parents and say, play with me, listen to me, would try to engage, and would be repeatedly shut down. And if you have that over a period of time, maybe years, the symptoms that can evoke in a person such that they maybe see us later in life. And so not digging deep and understanding those ghosts in the nursery, and then also the angels in the nursery would be missing such an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Thinking about you and your next steps,
Mhm.
Doing private practice with Adelpha. What are your plans for Circle of Security, and how are you going to integrate that?
Yeah. Well, I will say I haven't spoken yet with the co-owners of the practice, but my plan, my hope is that I'll be able to continue facilitating these groups, even when I'm in practice, as sort of like a group therapy, and perhaps particularly with mothers who are also receiving reproductive psychiatric care, through our practice. But yeah, absolutely, this feels to me like the most important thing in the world, and such a worthwhile investment in child mental health and maternal mental health. So it's absolutely something I want to continue doing.
Maybe time for one more question. Okay, and thank you for that. So this comes from the audience. How do you suggest working with a patient who may disagree with the providers or your interpretation of their own childhood? Good question.
Can you repeat that question one more time?
Absolutely. So, how do you suggest working with a patient who may disagree with your interpretation of their own childhood?
I see. Well, I would say I would caution against, kind of trying to impose a particular interpretation on someone else's childhood. I think in general, in psychotherapy and in any of our care, people are going to take away what they want to take away, and they have to kind of recognize and see things themselves. They can't, rather than accepting an interpretation from someone else. And so there has to be, I think our role as providers, as therapists, is to be a warm and loving presence, to listen with love, and to help them in a safe environment to explore the past, to try to understand some of the patterns that may be contributing to suffering in the present. But it's never to impose a particular idea of what happened. that's something that kind of has to come from the person themselves.
Such a beautiful response. I've seen you do that. I've seen you do that truly in the circle of security when you've led it, is when someone has a question or a moment of pause and is not sure and trying to kind of grapple with how this applies to their own life, you encourage reflection in real time. And really this is what this is about, is kind of that patient-centered care where you're not saying, tell me the information, I'm going to spit out what happened to you. You're doing it in real time and reflecting with them and modeling it for them so that it really is theirs to own. And I think it's a beautiful thing to watch. You're natural. And thank you for this grand rounds. It's incredibly thoughtful. I'm excited to see all that you do.
Thank you so much.